can take their seats, we'll get started in a minute.
Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. Really appreciate your attendance. So the EDPA has a huge impact on...
Can you use the microphone?
Yeah, sure can. Yep.
So the EDPA has a huge impact on property owners, so we're hoping that tonight we can enlighten you on some of those impacts and gather your ideas for how we go about protecting our property rights and our property value. My name is Denise Owen. I'm going to be the facilitator tonight. And just want to cover a few housekeeping items before we get going. So as you saw the sign on the way in, no food or beverage. And if you need to use the washrooms, they're just out the hall and to the left. And last item, cell phones. If you can turn them on silent or vibrate, that would be great. Okay. Yeah, that's what you guys do. And sorry, Pete, sign the petition? Oh, okay. But Pete just reminded me is if you have signed the petition online, there's no need to sign at the lobby there. So just we just want you to sign once. Okay, great. So why we're here? So we're here to talk about the EDPA, share stories, concerns, ideas. This session is actually sponsored by Sandwich Citizens, and it's a group of citizens that are looking for a more responsible EDPA, and we'll recognize the group with the red stickers. So this is a grassroots group. They've contributed their own time and money to put this session on, to run the petition, to print the brochures. So a lot of energy has gone into the EDPA effort. And their goal is to rebuild the EDPA with inclusion of all stakeholders. So we're looking for it to be replaced or rewritten with inclusion from property owners, from other stakeholder groups, to actually form something that is a little bit more responsible. So who we have here tonight is there's a wealth of information in these people here about the EDPA. So there's been probably a lack of information about the EDPA out there, very limited, and what has been out there is a bit contradictory and probably confusing. These people have spent a lot of time investigating, researching, and have a wealth of information to share with us tonight. So I'd like to introduce Anita Bull. She's a Sandwich citizen who is impacted by the EDPA, and she's probably the spokesperson for the group, if I can say that. Ted Lee is a professional biologist and has investigated a lot of EDPA properties, has a wealth of knowledge about the bylaw from a biological perspective. And Pete Lewis is retired co-chair of the BC Resource Information Committee. He's also a professional geoscientist. Huge, decades of experience in working with environmental data, environmental mapping, huge background in environmental development area as well. So our objectives for this meeting, what we want by the end of the meeting is that we have raised a greater awareness of what the EDPA is and the implications of it. We want to provide you also with an opportunity to share your concerns and your ideas and help us to set an action plan for what are we going to do about this. We're all here to help protect our property rights and protect our property value. So we want to establish some strategies for action and for achieving change. Really important is that we are also wanting to protect our environment. It's really fundamental to this issue. But our intent is to ensure that it happens in a manner that is based in science and it is equitable for citizens. So hopefully this is going to meet your expectations. Hopefully this is why you came here tonight. So what we have planned is really the first half is going to be presentations from the speakers. And then the latter half we want to open up the floor to your questions, your concerns, and your ideas. So we're going to start off with Anita. She's going to talk about the EDPA, just provide you with an overview, some of the implications of it, and some of the concerns that we have. Ted is going to talk about the ecological implications. And sorry, is the sun in your, it's quite bright for some of you. Do you need to, yeah, oh, good idea, yeah. Messages for Saanich. So Pete's going to speak to basically what are some of the solutions that we want Saanich to be able to consider. Then we'll open up the floor at about 8 o'clock for your comments and ideas. And Anita will step in after that and talk about next steps. Okay, what are we going to do with all those ideas that we've got? What's the game plan? And then we'll aim to close around 9 o'clock. So what I'm going to ask you to do in helping us to facilitate this session is if you can hold your questions to the open forum. We want to let the speakers get through their presentation, let them get through the material. It'll go very quickly, I promise. And so then we'll give you a chance to ask your questions. And because there's a lot of people, we want to limit the time that people speak for about 2 to 3 minutes. So try and make your point really quick within that 2-3 minute time period. I'm going to try and capture your issues and your ideas on the flip charts. And we're going to take that material and help to form our recommendations. So we really do want to hear from you, so I hope you start thinking about your questions and your ideas to share with us. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Anita. Overview of EDPA.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we hope to shed some light on the Environmental Development Permit Area bylaw, also known as the EDTA. We will look at the reality of its implementation and some ideas for changing it so that it's fair to all involved while accomplishing its intended objective of protecting sensitive ecosystems in our community. The EDPA bylaw has been in effect since March 2012. Can I ask how many of you here knew about the EDPA bylaw 3 years ago? Can I get a show of hands? Maybe about 8 hands or something like that. Okay, how many of you only recently found out about the EDPA, either through the media or by one of our members here coming to your door with a brochure? Can I get a show of hands? All right. So this bylaw has been in effect since March 2012, and it appears very few of you owners knew that it existed. Yet it affects the single biggest investment most of us will ever make, our homes. This bylaw restricts the use and enjoyment of our land, expropriates without compensation, and it places restrictive covenants on our property, even when there is no science to support such measures. In short, our properties have had value taken away from them. Why weren't we consulted 3 years ago? 3 years ago, Saanich placed more than 2,000 properties under the EDPA bylaw. Many of you were not notified or consulted for your input prior to the adoption of this bylaw. Legislation only requires that Saanich put notice in the newspaper advising of the public hearing. The notice in the newspaper read, "The District of Saanich has developed an EDPA to extend environmental protection of significant ecological features in a similar manner to the Streamside Development Permit Area. The EDPA will be considered by Council at a Committee of the Whole meeting. When? Monday, October the 24th, 2011 at 7:30 p.m. That was the notice in the paper. If you did read that, you probably would not have equated that general notice as something that would impact you. To make matters worse, following the adoption of the EDPA bylaw, for those of you that did receive notice from Saanich, that notice was not clear in its message. The notice was addressed to Dear Owner Occupant, and the notice read, as one of the many property owners in Saanich who have a natural feature on their property, this letter is to ensure that you are aware of the EDPA and where you can find more information. Would you have understood from this notice that your property had been placed in the EDPA? The objective of the EDPA bylaw is to protect areas of highest biodiversity within Saanich. For the foreseeable future, Saanich will continue to have growth and development, so there is a real need to protect any remaining sensitive ecosystems during these development processes. Saanich Citizens for a Responsible EDPA fully supports the objective of this bylaw, but we do not support the lack of public input and Saanich staff's broad interpretation of this bylaw. We further believe the bylaw has two major unintended consequences. One, it's at too high a cost to the homeowners, and two, the sensitive ecosystems in Saanich are not being protected. There are 9 points I want to cover tonight. One, the degree of restrictions. Two, rural properties at greater risk. Unscientific methods of selecting properties. Homeowners having to pay for the science. Covenants imposing further restrictions on your property. Decreased property value. Lack of compensation. Lack of consultation. And sensitive ecosystems are not being protected. What does it mean to have your property included in the EDPA? In short, you've had your property rights taken away from you that others in Saanich still enjoy. Numerous restrictions have been placed on your property. And we've got them listed here. They're also in our brochure. You may have read them already. As you can see, you do not need to develop your property to be encumbered by these restrictions. Putting up a fence, bringing in a load of topsoil, making a trail, or simply maintaining your water and sewer services are all restrictions. If you intend to do anything that is restricted, you will first need to hire a registered professional biologist at a minimum of $2,500 to actually confirm if you have a sensitive ecosystem on your property. Should the biologist confirm that there is no sensitive ecosystem, that does not necessarily mean your property will be removed from the EDPA and that you can then go ahead with your project. Saanich Citizens for a Responsible EDPA is aware of several cases where Saanich staff have declined removing properties from the EDPA where the biologist has confirmed there is no sensitive ecosystem. Saanich staff have given the property owners a broad number of reasons. It would seem that staff is putting these properties into a holding mode until the bylaw is made even more restrictive. Currently, the intent of the bylaw is to protect sensitive ecosystems and 4 other inventories. However, staff is proposing that this be changed to include remnant or degraded ecosystems, rather than following the provincial and federal guidelines that deal strictly with sensitive ecosystems. This change in the bylaw would then allow staff to keep these on-hold properties in the EDPA and would further allow thousands more properties in Saanich to be captured under the EDPA bylaw. No property in Saanich would be safe. Rural wooded properties. They have the same restrictions as other EDPA properties, but these restrictions on the rural properties are so onerous that they put the property owners' lives and their homes at risk. In some rural areas, the owners are prevented from pruning and removing underbrush debris to reduce the overall fuel load in the event of a fire. These homeowners are even restricted from keeping a clear perimeter around the immediate and recommended areas from their homes, which is completely contrary to what provincial government practices on Crown Forest land and contrary to advice provided homeowners in the Fire Smart Prevention Manual. The EDPA restrictions may also place these owners at further risk with respect to the homeowner's insurance policies and claims, as homeowners may be found negligent for not keeping their property clear within the accepted safety guidelines. Rural properties also have another issue. Rural properties can be large and they can have large natural areas on them, and therefore any impact of the EDPA can be large. To maintain these large natural areas, there needs to be some compensation to the property owner. They should not have to bear the large expense if it is for the benefit of the public. How was your property selected to be in the EDPA? Saanich used a sensitive ecosystem inventory mapping initiative that was done by the federal and provincial government in the 1990s. This mapping initiative was done by the way of aerial photography. This mapping document states it is a flagging tool to support local governments working to maintain biodiversity, but because it is based on air photos mapped at a 1 to 20,000 scale, field verification by professional biologists must be done before land use decisions are made. Saanich never did that. Saanich placed the task of getting the science on the affected property owners, much like reverse billing schemes that were outlawed in the 1990s. Many of the properties affected by the EDPA will not even have a sensitive ecosystem on them. They will have only groomed lawns and gardens under their tree canopies. So who should pay for the science? We have a 2013 Supreme Court legal case, McKay versus the Archaeology Branch. Some of you may have seen this article in the paper a few times over the last year or so. McKay purchased her Oak Bay property in 2006 with the intention of building a new home on the old footprint. There was nothing on the title of the property to indicate there was any heritage value on it. After having submitted her development application, McKay learned she would have to hire an archaeologist to conduct a heritage inspection. McKay, when the project was done, sued for cost. The court document states, permits and the cost associated with the resulting delays in construction and the property loss of value cost McKay approximately $600,000. The Supreme Court Justice ruled that provincial officials had no authority to make a Oak Bay homeowner pay for the archaeological survey of her property, and that it was not reasonable to require this homeowner to pay more than her fair share of the cost associated with providing a public benefit, being the collection and preservation of artifacts on the site. We believe the findings in this McKay versus the Archaeology Branch should apply to the EDPA bylaw. The EDPA bylaw is for the protection of sensitive ecosystems for the benefit of us all, for the benefit of the public. On January 26, 2015, Saanich Council approved the motion of the David Suzuki Foundation Blue Dot Tour, which is the declaration of the right to a healthy environment. Saanich Council approved that by December 31st, 2015, Saanich will consider objectives, targets, timelines, etc., including options to ensure equitable distribution of environmental benefits and burdens within the municipality. And now we're on to covenants. Covenants can impose even further restrictions on EDPA properties. Saanich staff is requiring property owners to sign restrictive covenants on their EDPA properties before development permits are being issued. The covenants are registered with lands and titles. The covenant restrictions can be more severe than the EDPA restrictions, further devaluing your property. The registered covenant can mandate things such as not being able to fence your property, not even being able to mow your lawn. The covenants can be excessive for any sensitive ecosystems on your property. Your property can essentially be sterilized, with its only use being to pay the taxes. In essence, these properties have been expropriated without compensation. They will quickly become overgrown with invasive blackberries, orchard grass, and broom. The long grass can quickly turn into a fire hazard as summer approaches. On one EDPA property we looked at, there were two sections of the property in the EDPA that Saanich staff did not want in their inventory. One section had been disturbed, and the other section had some invasive plants on it. Before Saanich would issue the homeowner a development permit, the homeowner was required to place a non-EDP section of the property into the EDPA in lieu of the two sections Saanich didn't want in the inventory. At the end of the day, the homeowner had more land in the EDPA than when he started. In essence, his development application was held hostage until he turned over more land. Clearly, Saanich staff considers the EDPA a mapping right. I'm not sure that this is what council intended when they adopted this bylaw. What is to be gained by this overreaching of the municipality staff? On decreased value, ask yourself this simple question. If you were looking at buying a house, would you choose what, if you were looking at buying a house, if you were looking to buy a house and you could choose between two similar properties, one that was covered by the EDPA and one that wasn't, which one would you choose? Would you choose the property that had the burden of hiring a biologist and the uncertainty that staff would then accept the biologist's report and allow you to carry on with your proposed activity? Or would you choose the property that was unencumbered by any EDPA bylaw? Guy Crozier, president of the Victoria Real Estate Board, told the Saanich News on February 25th, 2015, uncertainty around how Saanich staff will interpret EDPA guidelines will likely cause concern for potential buyers. He then went on to say, I do think it's fair to say any rule that shrinks a pool of buyers is going to have some type of effect on the value. That's just the law of economics. Early in 2014, I contacted BC Assessment to inquire why their records don't show properties being in the EDPA. BC Assessment advised Saanich had never notified them of the EDPA bylaw or of any properties being placed in the EDPA, so there was no consideration given on assessments. BC Assessment informed me that any time restrictions are placed on property values decrease. So this year, I appealed my 2015 assessment on the basis that my property had lost value having been in the EDPA. The appeal board denied my appeal, advising they had no EDPA property sales, and therefore no statistics to support EDPA properties losing value. Could this be because BC Assessment has no records of properties that are in the EDPA? On the issue of compensation, provincial legislation states compensation is not payable to any person for any reduction in the value of their land resulting from the adoption of an official community plan or bylaw such as the EDPA. Only if it can be proven that the EDPA results in no possible private uses of the land will the local government be liable to compensate you. When all uses have been taken away from the owner, the property is considered expropriated. The lost uses then must be registered on the lands and title of the property as a covenant before compensation will occur. So the provincial legislation recognizes a loss in property value when all of the uses have been taken away. Is it not reasonable then to conclude taking away some uses would result in some loss in value of your property? I did speak with former Federal Minister David Anderson on the issue of compensation. David Anderson referred me to the Pierce report, which deals with compensation for the Species at Risk Act. That's a federal act, but it does have some information that does flow to this, I believe. Generally, David Anderson told me that generally compensation is for the landowner when that person has to do something to protect the endangered species that he or she would not otherwise be doing on their property. The extra cost of doing what the recovery plan requires would be legitimate items for compensation. So while this doesn't speak to compensation for loss of property value or property uses, it does speak to compensation for the cost of maintaining sensitive ecosystems. If the cost of maintaining something for the benefit of the public is recognized at a federal level, it should also be recognized at a local level. Lack of consultation. There was no consideration or consultation with affected owners, property owners, prior to the adoption of the EDPA bylaw. It appears Saanich intentionally left landowners out of the discussion of this bylaw. 3 years after the fact, the majority of affected property owners have just found out through the media or from Saanich citizens for responsible EDPA bringing a brochure to their door that their property has been included in the EDPA. There will be many other property owners out there, affected property owners, who still don't know their property has been included in the EDPA. Saanich refused to provide us with a list of the affected property owners. We did manage, by way of looking at a GIS map, to identify approximately 1,600 of the more than 2,000 affected properties. But our time and our manpower has only allowed us to deliver our brochures to just over 1,000 of the affected homes. Saanich has not consulted with any other stakeholders, such as BC Assessment, BC Home Builders Association, Victoria Real Estate Board, and most, if not all, the Saanich community associations. By failing to consult with these affected property owners and other stakeholders, the bylaw has done nothing to encourage protection of sensitive ecosystems or other environmental values. The bylaw as it stands is onerous and will only discourage. It creates undue hardship for homeowners without really protecting our most sensitive ecosystems. Saanich needs to engage and insensitize owners of these properties to be stewards of their own land. Saanich had a civic and moral duty to taxpayers to consult with and consider all risks and impacts before going ahead with an onerous bylaw that in this case is essentially a land grab. Sensitive ecosystems. Where are they? Does anybody know where the sensitive ecosystems are? Protecting sensitive ecosystems is what this bylaw is all about. Yet without the science and without consulting with the homeowners and the stakeholders, no one knows where the sensitive ecosystems are. No one knows if these sensitive ecosystems are being damaged or destroyed. Had Saanich informed, consulted, and educated property owners and stakeholders, perhaps the objective of protecting sensitive ecosystems in Saanich could have been met. It was truly the objective of the bylaw, but Saanich has missed this opportunity. There are a number of property owners and other groups willing to work at protecting sensitive ecosystems. They're willing to do restorative work, removing invasive species, given the opportunity. Without informing, consulting, and engaging these people, no opportunity has been given to achieve the goal of protecting sensitive ecosystems in Saanich. In summary, the EDPA bylaw is at too high a cost to the homeowners, and our sensitive ecosystems are not being protected. Our goal here is to rebuild this EDPA bylaw with involvement of all stakeholders. Thank you.
Hopefully that was informative. I'm sure you all learned some new information about the EDPA. I'm going to turn it over to Ted, who's going to give us more information from a biological perspective.
Way more information than you want. So, ecological implications of the EDPA. Just some background, I am a registered professional biologist. I am an ecologist. I've had over 40 years, can't read that, experience in ecosystem mapping and inventory and extensive mapping of sensitive ecosystems all through the province. So I was a founding member of the Gary Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team, and I wrote a chapter for their ecosystem restoration manual. I'm going to cover what's in the EDPA. You need to mention it briefly. What are the standards? How are they being interpreted by Saanich staff? Gary Oak areas as an example. I'm going to talk a bit about the new environmentally significant area mappings and then implications to everybody. There's 5 inventories in the EDPA. There's wildlife trees, wetlands and watercourses, rare plants and animals, marine backshore, sensitive ecosystems, which I'll use later on a bit. The last 3 are the ones I'll focus on, and some properties actually have all 3 of them on their properties, mostly in 10 Mile Point. So EDPA bylaw, as Anita said, the objective is to protect the areas of highest biodiversity in Saanich. So the environmentally significant areas atlas, and this is District of Saanich wording, is to be included in the ESA atlas. Data must be from a comprehensive environmental inventory using technically acceptable standards. And this atlas should be used as a flagging tool. It should not be used in place of individual site assessment. I'll be going through these points throughout the presentation. So I'll start with a rare plant example. I'll just use one. This is yellow montane violet. It's an endangered species in Canada. There's a few locations in Saanich. This is one of them in Fillets Park, and this is the actual location of the violet. It's along a path at the south end. That's the only place it occurs in the park, but all of these properties occur in the EDPA because of that one location. It's because no one has done the inventory to say it's not on those properties. So there are 25 properties in the EDPA because of that. None of them should be in the EDPA. So 2 other inventories I'll talk about, some marine backshore and sensitive ecosystems. I'll divide sensitive ecosystems into rural and Garry Oak areas. So the marine backshore, there's no comprehensive environmental inventory. Remember, brought that up before. There are no technically acceptable standards that I can find. They're certainly not on the Saanich website or linked from. It is a 15-meter buffer from high water mark. It looks bigger on the maps, and bylaw says that it's a critical environment that supports many rare species that rely on specialized habitats, and native vegetation cover promotes stable, biologically diverse areas. So marine backshore covers every waterfront property in Saanich. And this is a 10 Mile Point example. So it's every property that goes along the waterfront from Cadborough Bay to the end of Cordova Bay. And also Portage Inlet area. So every waterfront property. Sensitive ecosystems are from a comprehensive environmental inventory, which is, Anita said, is a federal provincial inventory, mapped in 1990s and meant as a flagging tool. Saanich staff tell ecologists when they're assessing properties to use these 3 standards. So it's the standards for mapping ecosystems at risk of British Columbia. It's a federal provincial conservation manual for Vancouver Island, Gulf Islands, and best management practices from the Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team. The provincial standard states, I have to read here, sensitive ecosystems are those that are ecosystems at risk or ecologically fragile, and they must fall within the expected range of the defined plant community to be considered a sensitive ecosystem. And the federal provincial Vancouver Island report says that they must be in a relatively natural state. The Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team Manual says that Garry Oak ecosystems have a rich diversity of wildflowers, native grasses, and creatures. They are Garry Oak trees and the ecological processes and communities that occurred before European settlement. And urban Garry Oak trees surrounded by lawn and daffodils are not viable Garry Oak ecosystems. Poor condition areas. When you talk about ecological condition, it's the best to the worst. So poor is the worst. Provincial standards on sensitive ecosystems make it clear that those in poor ecological condition are not sensitive ecosystems. And talking to the federal and provincial experts on sensitive ecosystems, they say the same thing. Poor condition are not sensitive ecosystems. The rural areas, they have significant areas of ecosystems that are in very good condition, mostly. And there are significant areas presently mapped in the EDPA. Many more areas are proposed in the new environmentally significant area mapping. And they look like this. They're in really good shape. And as Louise said, there's lots of it. So this is just an example of Excelsior Road area. So the yellow and orange map areas are presently mapped in the EDPA as sensitive ecosystems. Same area, new mapping will include all of the areas around that. This is what was there before, presently, and to be added on. And this is mature forest, I'll talk about that later. But all of these areas also are very similar, so probably could be added over time. Gary Oak areas from, as I said, map photos in the 1990s, and very few of them were brown-toothed in the Greater Victoria area. District of Saanich description on their website says that they are this type of vegetation. So it's all native species, native grasses, camas, springdale, satin flowers. It does not say that Gary Oak, over lawn and garden, are Gary Oak woodlands. It does not say that sites in poor ecological condition and dominated by invasive species are Gary Oak woodlands. Gary Oak trees are already protected by the Tree Protection Bylaw, and so if you're using the EDPA, you're double counting. You're trying to just protect the oak areas. And these are just mapping errors. My estimate is well over 50% of private properties that are mapped in as Gary Oak areas in the EDPA are mapped wrong. And they are lawn and garden or dominated by invasive species. So well over 50% are wrong. These are mapping mistakes and should be removed from the inventory. So here's an example, Greyfoot Road. This is all mapped. There's 28 properties. There shouldn't be one of these mapped as a sensitive ecosystem. There's no sensitive ecosystem there. It's gone. It's probably gone 50 years ago. It should be removed from the EDPA. So, as I said, the mapping errors, if the original mapper had checked these properties on the ground, they would have removed these map areas from the inventory. District of Saanich staff want property owners to protect these mapping areas. So the environmentally significant atlas states, and I come back to this, that has to be from a comprehensive environmental inventory with technically acceptable standards, and it's just a flagging tool that has to be checked on the ground. This is Saanich wording, right? So the new ESA mapping has an urban forest category, which is not a sensitive ecosystem, a young forest category, which is not a sensitive ecosystem, and a mature forest category that is not a sensitive ecosystem. Old forests are already a sensitive ecosystem category. So there's also an altered Gary Oak East ecosystem, which is basically anything with oak trees over top of lawn and garden. So none of these are defined by Saanich. None are from a comprehensive inventory with technically acceptable standards. So here's an example of an urban forest along Richmond Road. And basically it's forested area in an urban setting over top of lawn and gardens. It's an altered Gary Oak ecosystem. It's along Glendenning Road, and it has connection into Mount Duck Park, but this underneath is lawn and gardens. And this is one of the best examples I've got because there's no connection to anything else. So this is on Persimmon Road, and it's Gary Oaks over lawn and gardens, and there's way more examples of this all through Saanich that have not been mapped yet, but could be mapped. So what does this mean? This last example shows no corridors to parks. It's often stated by Saanich staff as that's what they're trying to protect. New maps make it clear that Saanich staff could try to protect any areas of Gary Oak trees and lawn and garden in the EDPA. This is the new standard. So side-by-side properties presently exist in Saanich that have identical attributes, one in the EDPA, one that's not in the EDPA, both with lawn and gardens underneath. So check out the next photos. Which one do you think is in the EDPA? And which one is not? They look the same, or very similar. Right now, this one is. This one could become. So in 2013, this is a Saanich staff report, someone in this Gary Oak ecosystem recovery team said that District of Saanich should recognize that a remnant environmentally sensitive area is still an ESA and put guidelines in place to ensure that less valued ESAs remain protected in the EDPA. And the staff interpret that the council intended to protect SEI polygons map areas regardless of their condition. So basically every property in Saanich with oak trees would meet this definition. Saanich staff won't tell us at GERT who gave us that quote. It certainly does not follow GERT's best management practices that I talked about earlier, which says Gary Oak ecosystem is much more than Gary Oak trees. And urban Gary Oak trees surrounded by lawns and gardens are not viable Gary Oak ecosystems. So implications for council. We don't believe that council wanted to protect mapping errors. We don't believe that council intended to protect Gary Oak stands with lawn and gardens underneath. And Gary Oak trees are already protected by the tree protection bylaw. So as I said, thousands more properties could be added to the EDPA over time using the proposed staff definition. So many areas of Maplewood, High Quadra, Marigold area, Royal Oak could all be added to the EDPA and called sensitive ecosystems if Saanich staff move in this direction. Rural areas, basically any area with forest will be added to the EDPA. We've got young forest, mature forest, old forest, that's everything. Is this what council had planned? Are these all areas of highest biodiversity? What needs to be done? Nobody knows where the areas of highest biodiversity in Saanich are, except in the parks. Anita mentioned this. Saanich needs to inventory the present sensitive ecosystem inventory map units by following the actual standards. And we need to find ways to protect, maintain, and restore the special areas. Those are out there. We don't need to be focusing on gardens and lawns. Conclusions, no just scientific justification for what they're doing. There's many mapping errors. Long-term result is not thought out at all. What will happen over time? What will be left if areas of lower value are protected? Well, many of you have seen this type of thing. This is a Saanich park that was accepted for development up in Rainbow Ridge. And it's all blackberry underneath oak trees. There was a bunch of other oak trees there that all died and fell over. So this is what remains. This is what Saanich staff are basically pushing this EDPA program towards in the Gary Oak areas. So do we want to protect this? This is sensitive ecosystem was left alone for 5 years after development. It's all blackberry and broom, 10 feet high. Or do we want to protect it? Wrong way. Or do we want to protect this? This is, I assume, what the bylaw is trying to get at. This is a Gary Oak ecosystem meadow up on Knockin Hill, which is in really good shape. It needs some restoration work, but this is what we're trying to get at. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. That was amazing. amazing from a biological perspective. I think we're really well informed about what classifies as a sensitive ecosystem. Now over to Peter, who is going to provide some messages for Saanich.
Good evening. Ted and Anita provided you with a lot of information, but we also tonight would like to come up with some messages to Saanich about the current EDPA bylaw and how it's being implemented and where we think they should go from here. And so I want to talk to some of those messages. I've got 10, and we hope you'll use the open forum which follows to express your views on this. Oops. Okay, message 1. This is an intrusive bylaw affecting thousands of properties, many unnecessarily. It's, I think, the most intrusive in British Columbia. There's more than 2,000 properties affected, as has been said, and I think it's really important to emphasize that it's not restricted to what we all think of as true property development or subdivision applications. The Dear Owner-Occupant letter I got says, and I quote, "Permits are required to ensure the natural environment is protected and restored during development. Development can be something as simple as extending a patio or removing vegetation," unquote. Now, to be fair to Saanich, they say that you wouldn't really need a permit for many of these activities, but the bylaw says you have to apply for one. And don't forget, as Anita said, that the EDPA is like a blanket covenant on a property. Just by existing, it affects the value and enjoyment and use of the property. Saanich needs to fully appreciate the current bylaw impacts all of those things, and it impacts those of us who just want to plant gardens, add patios, build fences. So that's message 1. Message 2, opposition is justified in growing. And that's in spite of minimal and ineffective communication from Saanich. The letter I got from Saanich in 2012 was the first, the last, and the only EDPA communication that I've ever had until I wrote an email to the Mayor and Council a month ago. 3 years after the EDPA bylaw was passed, we saw from show of hands tonight, most affected property owners still don't know it exists. So we need to deliver a message to Saanich that opposition is not going to go away. A third message, the existing bylaw needs to be reviewed, reassessed, and rebuilt. There are amendments proposed to the bylaw, but my understanding of the proposed amendments is that they make it even more intrusive and rigid. One of the things I haven't seen and would like to see was whether there was a proper briefing note detailing options with pros and cons provided to council before they passed the bylaw in 2012. I've never seen anything like that. All I've seen is a report to Mayor and Council that contains only one option, the one that led to the current bylaw. The review needs to look at where Saanich wants to go with this thing over 30 years, not 3 years. It needs to include bylaw content, especially unnecessary impacts on property owners, and it needs to include bylaw implementation, including the need for clear standards and procedures, deadlines for response, and a process for appeal that includes independent review. Message 4. This time, please, directly and meaningfully consult. Newspaper ads, open houses, online feedback, after-the-fact form letters are not enough for something that has the impact that the EDPA bylaw does. The bylaw claims to balance individual rights and community rights. How can it do that if the community had no real direct input? So I think, would hope that Saanich would ensure involvement, not just by stakeholders, but also by expert groups and public groups, the community associations to represent the public. The community association, my community association certainly, was sent a letter about the bylaw. Nobody visited the community association to make a presentation. The head of it was aware that the EDPA existed, but he had no idea of the implications of it, which is unfortunate for him because his whole backyard is in the EDPA and it's a couple of Gary Oaks over lawn and daffodils. So I suggested some of the groups that Saanich might want to consider involving in this. We include the Association of Professional Biologists of BC, the Victoria Residential Builders Association, UVic Environmental Law. They wrote something called the Green Bylaws Toolkit, which is the standard for writing bylaws like the EDPA. UVic Environmental Studies, they have a Restoration of Natural Systems program. They could provide a lot of expertise towards some of the questions which Ted and Anita talked about. And BC Assessment, to me, are the standard for good processes for review and appeal of decisions. And I think some help is needed with that. Message 5. Clearly define significant natural area needs. The current bylaw as written is very different from that that's being used for approvals. And Ted and Anita have talked about all of that. This is a critical issue, and I think Saanich needs help from outside experts on this. Some of those groups I mentioned before. I also think Saanich needs to choose a definition that's appropriate for its long-term goals. And a definition that does not include areas with a few Gary Oaks over lawn and ornamental gardens. To be fair, too, there's an ongoing debate among experts about what conservation value an area should have in order to justify protection by the Saanich EDPA bylaw. I think Saanich needs to hear from all sides before it makes a decision. Message 6. Use and pay for appropriate up-to-date data, as a lot of other jurisdictions in BC have done, Nanaimo, for example, and many others. There are many property owners affected by the EDPA who have no intention of developing in the conventional sense, but they've lost property rights and value because of mapping errors. And it is very difficult to have mapping errors corrected by Saanich at the present time. These errors completely destroy the credibility of both the EDPA Atlas and of the bylaw itself. If you use dated, off-the-shelf, sensitive ecosystem inventory, which is the source for most EDPAs, that wasn't intended for EDPA use, more than 2/3 of which wasn't verified on the ground, you're going to lose credibility. And that Green Law Bylaws Toolkit I talked about before says that very explicitly. And the interesting thing is a lot of the SEI mapping errors could be quickly and easily eliminated by a visit from a biologist. So, fix your data. Number 7. The EDPA includes something called a buffer area, as well as an environmentally sensitive area. And a buffer area is defined in advance by Saanich. And in a lot of other jurisdictions, it's not. The buffer area, as it's called, is defined during the development proposal process. Now, what the buffer is, if you have an environmentally sensitive area, and you get a computer to draw a line around the boundary of that environmentally sensitive area that's 10 meters away from it. That 10-meter area is the buffer. And the EDPA Atlas includes the environmentally sensitive area plus the buffer. Now that 10-meter wide buffer can be a large part of somebody's backyard. So it's significant. But it was drawn by a computer. It bears no relationship to what's actually on the ground. It goes through houses, it goes over driveways. It has no relationship to what's on the ground. But what it does is it puts restrictions on hundreds of properties that would otherwise be little affected by the EDPA. So it pours gasoline on the EDPA fire for many property owners. We don't believe that the cost of defining buffer areas in advance is worth the benefit. Now, buffers and mapping errors are kind of why I'm here tonight. My property backs onto Playfair Park off Quadra. And there are genuine sensitive areas behind my property in the park. So my backyard has two levels. In one corner of the lower level, there's a genuine environmentally sensitive area. And when I got my letter from Saanich, that's what I thought was impacted. But the other half of my lower level is a couple of Gary oak trees and grass over rubble fill. But that's also in the environmentally sensitive area. Then, on top of that, I've got the 10-meter buffer, which was added. The 10-meter buffer covers my upper level, which is 3 meters, 10 plus feet of rubble with grass and ornamental gardens and vegetable gardens and no Gary oaks, but it's in the buffer. It goes right to my back door. All of that, my use of all of that is affected by the EDPA. The restrictions on the buffer are not as significant as they are within the EDPA, but they are still there, they are still significant, they still show up on your property. Number 8, Saanich has used an all sticks and no carrots methodology with this, and that's never worked. From the Green Bylaws Toolkit, the only direct enforcement that Saanich has over an EDPA is a costly Supreme Court injunction. The Green Bylaws Toolkit also says that EDPAs work best when local government can use regulatory bylaws, like tree protection or soil deposit and removal, to essentially enforce them. But you can use those to enforce significant development, but what are you really going to do to somebody who puts in a new ornamental garden? Obviously nothing. But you've scared people, and now they don't trust your intentions. So one of the big issues for Saanich is, with all of this, how are they going to rebuild trust? Because there are environmental organizations in Greater Victoria that have spent a lot of effort working cooperatively with neighbors to natural areas to help them look after their own properties in ways that assist in maintaining those natural areas. And I would guess that when those organizations show up at your door, you're not going to be inviting them onto your property. Number 9, compensation is not a bad word. Especially for large privately owned EDPAs in rural Saanich. Again, this is from the Green Bylaws Toolkit. Property tax exemptions recognize that landowners are providing ecological and social benefits to the entire community. Islands Trust, for example, provides a 65% property tax exemption on the on covenant areas to landowners a 65% exemption to landowners who agree to a permanent conservation covenant on an EDPA. Everybody benefits: local government, property owner, community. Number 10, Saanich, please show leadership on your own land. Volunteers look after your extensive and important natural areas, if they're looked after at all. Now, to be fair, Saanich does coordinate and support volunteers, but the staff focus appears to be on lawns, ornamental gardens, and playgrounds. So Saanich needs to invest and refocus staff. And one of the ideas we had is to look for innovative ways to create a natural areas restoration fund for both public and covenanted lands, including corporate donations, perhaps. So those are my 10 messages. And so to end where we started, the Saanich EDPA needs to be rebuilt. It doesn't work for property owners, and it doesn't work for the environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. That was, again, a very informative speech. I think that summarizes all the key recommendations we have for Saanich. So as you can see, we've got a wealth of information sitting at this table about the EDPA. And I'd like to welcome you up to, this is the open forum part of the evening. Welcome your questions, your ideas. We would like you to, we've got 2 microphones here, so you're welcome to come up to the microphone. Again, just limit, if you can, to 2 to 3 minutes. So some of the key questions that we'd like you to consider are, how do you suggest we raise the profile of our concerns with Saanich? What would you like to see Saanich do to fix this? What ideas do you have for raising citizen awareness and action? We need to get the word out. There's a lot of people that don't know that they have the EDPA on their properties. How do we reach them? And what questions do you have for Saanich Council? So we're going to be putting forward some recommendations and some questions for Council. We'd like to hear your ideas. What questions do you have? I'm going to capture your...
One of the things that I hear people being...
Hold on.
Stop working.
There's a switch on the top. Okay.
Better?
Yeah.
One of the things that I hear from people is that they've had substantial fines for doing work on property. But nowhere is there a schedule of fines. Has anybody found one? I'm still looking for one. And the other one is, Saanich has a noxious weed bylaw. Can you remove noxious weeds from an area which is under the EDPA? Which bylaw rules?
Ed, you're probably the best one to answer that.
As far as I know, you can remove invasive species from EDPA areas. That is not a problem. It's mostly about natural vegetation that you cannot.
I'm a retired lawyer who practiced law in municipal law. The only way this will be resolved, because if you go to council, they'll say they need a report from staff. Because they don't do anything on the report from staff, and that will be nothing will happen. You need a legal opinion from a good municipal lawyer, and there are a number of them in town, to review the bylaw. I've read it 2 or 3 times. It really doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, and it's very difficult to follow. It's badly drafted, but I would think that you need a very up-to-date legal opinion on the bylaw and how best to attack it. That may get the attention of the staff. The mayor spoke at the Canoga Bay Association annual general meeting, and his suggestion was a 6-month moratorium of the bylaw and have a good look at it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is John Coombs, and I live at 1299 Chancellor Avenue. I'm impacted directly by this bylaw. One of the things I've noticed in a conversation I hear from all the speakers is this distinction between Saanich as an individual and the people in Saanich who live here. I think one of the messages we have to take back to Saanich is, we are Saanich. They eventually will have to listen to us. And whether that comes through protests, things like, I think we're very close to a tax revolt in this country. Considering in Saanich, what we heard last week, 4.2% increase in our property taxes. Out of the blue, there's just one thing after another is coming. And I really think we need to move forward that if the people are speaking, Saanich needs to listen because Saanich is the people. And I don't like this distinction that we're trying to make it stand against us. They are us. So that's one of the messages I think we need to strongly.
Does anyone have suggestions for how we convince them to hear our message? Because that's the struggle we're having, is how do we get them to listen?
Storm the Bastille.
Sorry?
Storm the Bastille.
That's one option.
Hi, Mike Newson, I live on 10 Mile Point.
And here.
Mike Newson, 10 Mile Point. We've been here 1 year. I assume a lot of you also have moved here from other places. What happens to stuff that was already present in one's backyard? Is there a grandfather clause? And my second question is, what are the other municipalities doing? Do they have a similar EDPA program, or are we that far out in left field? Thank you.
You are allowed to maintain what is in your yard now. You're just not allowed to remove natural vegetation, disturb the soil. But what you have, you can maintain. The other municipalities in Victoria do not have this bylaw. Saanich is the only one that has a bylaw at this time. That's correct, I think? Yeah. Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Group Trip, we're at 4600 Cordova Bay Road, and we're affected by a very large area that is pasture that our sheep are grazing, so there's no natural vegetation left after those girls are done with it. The good news is they like broom. So all of the broom seeds that we get come from Mount Doug Park because they don't do anything with the broom in their parks. But they're not covered under these bylaws. They're exempt from all the bylaws. They don't have to maintain them if they don't want to. That was pointed out tonight when we were at the invasive species presentation by Adrian to the environmental committee, who seemed quite bored with the entire thing and did not hold her feet to the fire on any issues at all. So I think in terms of holding council's feet to the fire, I think to continue writing letters to the editor by more and more people, and perhaps by 10 people each writing a letter on each of your 10 points, so that they keep getting hammered and hammered and hammered, that we really do mean it. That, I hope, will help get their attention. I don't think they like to be embarrassed in public.
Great, thank you. So everyone write letters.
Hi, Rob Ashwell from 4282 Parkside, be back on to Mount Doug Park. Having moved to Victoria 5 years ago, I'm just wondering, and having grown up in Saanich, it's different now. What is the attitude, or have you approached some of these council members who enacted this bylaw? We elected over 50% of them, and what has been your reaction in approaching them on this? And secondly, we do have a federal election coming in October as well. We do have Andrew Weaver, who I would hope would be sensitive to this as well, being he represents Saanich.
Anita?
Yes, we have approached mayor and council. We've actually met with the mayor and 5 council. 3 of them, we've not had that opportunity to discuss it with them. So we have been working on that, trying to get our message to them as to the problems with the bylaw. And we're continuing to try and communicate with them. I think the mayor may be here tonight, and yes, the mayor's here tonight. Unfortunately, council had a meeting tonight at the same time. They're hoping to finish, and perhaps some of them will show up here later this evening. And then, yes, the Environment Committee. The committee, Susan Bryce was the chair of the committee at the time the bylaw came into effect. Pardon? Oh, Vicki Sanders, sorry, yeah. Vicki Sanders was chair of the Environment Committee at the time. Dean Murdoch has been a new chair of the committee, and we've met with him as well on this. What about Andrew? Andrew Weaver? Yes, Andrew was invited tonight, but was unable to make it.
Will we hear from Richard? Do you have any comment, Richard?
You're welcome to come forward, Mayor Alba.
No speech, but here goes. So I was first introduced to this issue by the good people here to my left, and it's really come as quite a shock of how the intent of the bylaw really hasn't been met by the application of it. So I think in theory, it's very good, but in practice, it's turned out not so good. And I look at the mapping areas and I see the homes that have been encompassed by it, and I've been out on the field trips and I've seen the areas which aren't worth protecting, and the areas that are worth protecting haven't been captured by this. And so, as was said earlier, when I was at the Cove Bay Residents Association speaking at the AGM, I thought that we need to take this back a little bit. And I don't quite know the process for that yet, but it is going to take some public pressure from yourselves to do this, because we need to have a large voice to do this. So, something I could do, which would be to bring a motion to council to address this and have them look at it right there and then. But I would like this to come through the Environmental and Natural Areas Committee, where this bylaw originated, so that Councillor Murdoch and the members of that committee can look at your concerns through our process and then take it to council. That would be my preferred route. And that's what I'd like to have done. And I think it's going to take some more emails to the councillors, it's going to take some more letter writing, but ultimately, I also think it's going to take getting the councillors out into the field like I had to come, before I could really understand what it is, because it has become a very complicated issue and a very complicated bylaw. And so that's what I'm pledging to do. I'd like to continue to represent yourselves and the people here that have educated me on this, and take it to council and support a revision of this bylaw in some fashion. It's absolutely necessary.
Yes, I'm Jan Visser. I live next to Arbutus Cove Park, and also on the waterway is a steep slope that goes to Arbutus Cove. And I have had many contacts with Savage all the time about the park and about the slope. And the last man that came on my property, because I wanted to see what we could do, and he said to me, yes, you have to get a permit from an arborist to prune your trees. And he said, but when that happens, he said, you might be ordered to take away on your property the holly that is growing there, and the broom that is growing there, and another plant, I forget the name. But indeed, this goes pretty far in coercing me to do things. I think we should be all permitted to prune our trees. I agree we shouldn't top them, but by pruning trees you can make them more healthy and in a better shape. And I think we as property owners, we should always have the right to do that, and that they can even forbid me to, force me to take away the honey that is growing on my property in many places, and also the broom, Scottish broom. All these things can be easily taken off when necessary, but so, yeah, I'm really very scared by what this bylaw is going to do. Thank you.
Right, thank you for your
Hi, my name is Justin. I'm here for 4755 Carlos Place, Margaret Woodlock. She's got a property that's high bank on overlooking the water, and they had a rather elaborate path and stairs and everything put down to the beach 20 years ago. Now that path is in need of some major repairs. If I do the repairs on that, what are going to be the implications from Saanich? Am I going to be putting her in jeopardy of some kind of fines? That's number one. Number two, who the hell is Saanich to tell her or any other property owner here what they can and cannot do with their own property? Who are they? They're men and women, and they work for us.
That's right. We are.
This whole thing is all connected to UN Agenda 21. And if everybody here doesn't know what UN Agenda 21 is, Google it, because it's going to mean a lot of bad stuff coming down the pipe for all of us. I've got some information here. If you want some information on it tonight, see me and sit just over here. But we've got to look into this really fast.
Thanks, Justin. Did you want an answer to your question? The number one, I'm just wondering, Anita, do you have any advice in terms of the pathway down to the beach and restoring it, what the implications of that would be? Do you know?
I'm not clear on that.
Okay.
Yes, my name is Ray Travers, and I live at 1709 Carnegie, and I'm basically here, I guess, to talk about Plan B. I think that all of the things that have been said about directly contacting the mayor and the councillors, please do that first. But I happen to be the president of the Gordon Head Residents Association as of last Thursday night. Are there any other residents association in the audience here this evening? Okay. And about a dozen in Saanich. We exist to provide a voice to the people of Saanich. And we have no power, but we do have influence. And so I would recommend, get in touch with your local neighborhood residents association. The umbrella organization is called SCAN, Saanich Community Action Network. Google it, you can find out who your local representative and meet with your local boards, and they can add a voice to what I would call Plan B.
Excellent.
My name is Paul Diggle. I live on Old West Saanich Road, so I'm not in the urban area, but the rural. And I come to this from the point of view of a retired professional forester. I've got a lot of expertise in forest ecosystems. And one of the questions that I have is there any minimum size that is being defined to create a sustainable, sensitive ecosystem area? It seems to me that there hasn't been in what is being mentioned tonight. Because change happens. Ecology, people that are ecologists know very well that you change the area that is now. 10 years will be different, 50 years will be even more different. You can't freeze an area in time with just leaving it the way it is. Saanich, I believe, also has a sustainable food policy. And if the municipality wants to enable a sustained production, a self-sufficient kind of production for food, if we put it all into natural areas, there's no food production. Eventually, all food production gets taken out of production whatsoever. And as far as noxious weeds are concerned, the areas that I've seen with most of them, the worst areas are the road allowances, which are municipal responsibilities, plus the municipal parks. And if it's good enough for the municipality to want us to look after our land, they should set an example and do it first, and do it best. And one last suggestion for those people who are so keen on getting back to original sensitive ecosystems. What about rewilding Cedar Hill Golf Course?
Yeah, hi, my name's Mike Egan. I'm a Saanich resident. I also make my living as a government relations consultant, which is a polite term for lobbyist. And what I can tell you is that politicians, and like I say, I make my living lobbying federal, provincial, and sometimes local government politicians. Politicians are like water. They follow the path of least resistance. You get your concerns in the media, you put your concerns directly to them, you be persistent, and you will make progress. Because keep in mind, and it's great to see Mayor Richard Atwell here tonight, but keep in mind, all of these people, and most of the people on council are incumbents that have been there for many years. They, many of them will be running for re-election. And they will certainly want your votes, and they will certainly want your campaign donations in 3.5 years' time. So I think if you make it clear to them, both individually and collectively, what your concerns are and how serious this matter is, I think you will get some progress. And quite frankly, if you don't get progress, you need to make it abundantly clear to these people, both directly, collectively, and through the media, that they sure as hell can't count on your votes in the next election, and you will be voting for candidates that are prepared to have their bylaws implemented.
I'm Gordon Albert, live on Berkeley Road. I'm just wondering why the municipality shouldn't be responsible for paying for the cost of identifying where these areas are. Because it's for the good of the, so-called the good of the residents. And then somebody had mentioned that it was around $2,000 to have a study done. Well, that law was passed in 2013 for our place. And it was the only the only municipality in British Columbia that's got a such law. And our proposal was halfway through the planning department, and we literally stopped for 3 months and passed this law. So all we had to do was get this EDPA study done. We asked how much it would be through Adrian Pollard and the head of the planning department, and they said $2,500 in 2 or 3 weeks. It took 8 months and $14,000.
Oh.
My name is Rob Stewart. I live on San Marino Crescent. Excuse me. Speaking of the errors in mapping, I think that's kind of something that would be applicable to my property. It's about 96% of my properties in this area, including my entire house. So the one area, the little square on our property, is the one that's in the setback from the road. So it's something that kind of touches on, it shouldn't really apply. It's kind of this blanket mapping thing. Is there a way that we could have an expert such as yourself, Ted, or some other kind of scientist to come by and say, okay, this is an error that, like, it seems like there's clusters. If you look at the map, there's these little clusters of houses that are in these areas. Is there a way to sort of do a quick assessment of these properties and say, okay, this is clearly a mistake? Like, is there something that we can do?
Yeah, that's right. As Pete just said, we could do that, but science staff won't remove it necessarily, right? If it's wrong, if it's a mapping error. I would be glad to. I'm not going to make that offer to everybody, but get in touch with me later, right?
But, so I mean, just even from Saanich,
just someone from Saanich could come by and go on the property and say this should stand, even if it's an error, right? They are not following their own standards that they provide to ecologists and homeowners. They are not. In reality, checking the mapping errors is a really quick job to do. You can go on most properties that are lawn and garden and take 10 seconds and go, this is not a sensitive ecosystem. Or maybe it is, or yes it is. But most of them don't take much time to do no. No is real quick. And most of the ones, there's hundreds that I've seen already that should not be mapped in the EDPA. They are not. They are lawn and garden under oak trees or something else.
So if it's something...
So talk to me afterwards if you want, and I'd gladly combine it.
But if it's something that Saanich can do, so if this is something that we get into motion, and it sounds like a more cost-effective way to get rid of a lot of these properties, if there's 2,000 properties there, and to just come by and say, okay, here's a cluster, I see why in the 90s they might have thought this might be the area, but if you come through and say, okay, that's clearly a no, 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 get rid of the no's first, leave the maybes and the yeses, you know, leave for whatever. I mean,
so Saanich staff could do that, but they have to follow the standards that they have said are in the bylaw, and they're not willing to do that. Right?
Thanks.
So I think
That's, I don't know how else to answer that. It's just the reality of it now. So, but talk to me later if you want.
Thank you for your point.
Kate Inslee, I live on Cordova Bay Road. With all due respects to Richard Atwell, thank goodness we have a change in Saanich Council. But I listened to Dean Murdoch this morning on the CBC, and it was quite clear that he, although he is heading up the EDPA Environmental Committee, it seemed to be quite clear that he doesn't know what his staff is doing. And I think the staff council needs to tell the staff what they want, and we need to tell council. Yes.
So my name's John Tully, and I actually I'm not affected directly by the EPA, but I did spend a lot of years working in the Federal Department of Agriculture. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of issues on environmental law and so on. And one of the questions that I have is, there's an area of law called administrative law. And normally, and I think the lawyer was here mentioned, usually when people think that the government isn't following its own rules and so on, they're subject to administrative law. And I think this is a clear example of where the implementation of a bylaw is not being done in accordance with the bylaw or the background to the bylaw. So I was wondering if you investigated whether administrative law affects bylaws. And it would seem to me that that would be another effective way of getting the attention of Saanich.
Yes, very good point. I think ombudsman, is that related to the ombudsman and raising a complaint with the ombudsman? Did you want to speak to that yet?
There is a complaint that started with the ombudsman. You will, ombudsperson for British Columbia. These are the two that have put in the first complaint. We can probably add names to their complaint.
Thanks, Ted. Mark Inslee and Beth, my wife. We're on Cordova Bay Road, 4909, and we, a year ago, tomorrow, we started a deck permit with Saanich to build stairs, rebuild stairs down to Blue Beach. And we learned at the EDPA at that time. And we said, well, no problem. What do we need to do? We showed pictures, what have we done? Long story short is we've been struggling with Adrian Pollard and staff on their implementation of the bylaws. The bylaws seemed fairly clear to us. We were just rebuilding what had already been there probably since the 30s. A few little changes on top of that, but they were little changes. In fact, we've gone to a great extent to protect trees. But they've ignored everything. They've ignored their own bylaws. The implementation is clearly different than the intent, it seems, of the bylaw. And so we've issued we've tried to create a complaint with the Ombudsman office.
I just want to say that one of the biggest concerns for me, I guess, being a nurse, is that people are afraid to complain. They're afraid to go to Saanich. It causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of time. The process is slow, it's methodical, but your voice will be heard if you follow the right steps. And just getting back to the anxiety and the stress, people have actually physically become ill dealing with Saanich. I'm not kidding. Heart attack, exacerbation of chronic illness. And the point is, we're all on the same page. We live in the same area. We are Saanich. We are the people. It's our responsibility to elect the officials to represent us. We expect more from the people at Saanich who are administering these bylaws. And it's okay to challenge them. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to tell them that you think they're wrong. So I invite people to, if they have an issue, bring it forward, talk to the counselors. They will meet with you. That's all I have to say.
I'll just interrupt for a second. Bev, you did put in a complaint with the Office of the Ombudsperson on this, and Bev has a file number. We will post that on our website, I believe.
It's also on the handout.
And it's on a handout that we'll leave on the tables as you go out. And if you have a complaint with regards to this bylaw, you can add it on to the Ombudsman file that Bev has already started. The file number will be on the sheet outside the door. Thank you.
And Justin, you've got your answer to the pathway down to the beach you were looking for? Yeah.
As well, we are looking into a complaint to the Inspector of Municipalities. I forget what ministry they're with, but got some information through Lana Poppins' office today about that, and we will be pursuing that, and we will post that on our website as well. So look out for that. But we'll try to get one person to get in touch with, and then we'll let the rest of you go after it.
Daniel Johns, 4181 Glendenning. I want to start by thanking you guys for taking the time to present today. There's a lot of good info. I think that everyone has benefited from being able to listen to what you had to present. And I was wondering if today's presentation was on the website.
Yes, we'll get it up. Kevin in the back is looking after our website. We've made some final changes to it. We'll get it up first thing in the morning.
Okay, yeah, I'm just thinking that when we're looking at writing letters, it would be great to have that as a resource for
Definitely. Yeah, we'll do that.
And I guess part two is, do you know how this, the EPDA, who enacted it, where did it generate from? Because as a voter, it's something that I think especially younger voters, the frustration that a lot of times is accountability. Where's the accountability? When there's not a name or a point that we can reference, it becomes quite frustrating. It just becomes the council or the they.
Yes.
There's no face or name to it. So.
Right. Anita, did you want to answer that one? Here.
If you remember, I talked about I couldn't find a proper briefing note that listed options with advantages and disadvantages. The first thing that we have is a report to Mayor and Council dated September 12th, 2011 from the Director of Planning saying proposed environmental development permit area. And that was submitted came from staff, and it only had one option on it, which is the bylaw. Now, staff have said that they consulted, and I think we've commented a lot on the level of consultation over that. But as far as I know, that's how it all started. It started with staff. There was some consultation,
Do you have names of the staff on it?
the director of planning at the time.
Yeah.
There were administrators' comments.
And as one of the previous speakers spoke about, you know, when it comes to election, avoiding that particular person, be nice to know who that was. So they choose.
Well, it came from staff and with council, so we don't elect staff, but,
And I think what was mentioned previously was that council may have not fully understood what was being proposed, because it is complicated, it takes time to really understand what it's all about. So, thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Bob Hammer. I'm living at 2828 Murray Drive on the Gorge Waterway. What I'd like to express here tonight, I'm impacted, of course. What I think we need to realize is that we all have to protect the environment to some degree. I have grandchildren that come to our house and visit, stay overnight, and they love to see the river otters on my dock. They love to see the squirrels eating my strawberries out of my garden. I'm feeding those animals. The birds raid my cherry trees before I even get to taste them. And the kids just love to see the swans and the activity that's going on. And that Gorge Waterway has been cleaned up a tremendous amount. So I really feel that we have to be stewards of our own properties and concern ourselves about the invasive species, the blackberries that are growing. If I can't go and cut those blackberries, I'll be damned if I'm going to let someone come on my property. That person's going to have a big issue with me. My grandchildren, if we don't protect this environment, 30 years from now are going to hate us. They're going to hate the grandparents for what we've done to the environment. So I think it's really important that we all are stewards of our own land and respect the environment. And to press this issue, I think I read it in this information sheet that I'm going to tell 5 people that I know about this, what's happening here. Okay? I didn't expect myself too well, but thank you.
No, appreciate it.
My name is Doug Critchley. I'm an invader from View Royal, but I have signed your petition. I think I was number 16. I'd just like to bring up a comment about contacting council and sending letters. I've been told by an MP in the past that each letter is worth 100 votes. So people do take notice. And there's 1 or 2 words that I'd like to add that you can consider putting into your letter. We have the 10 points, which will be on your website. I would like to use a phrase. This is what's actually called regulatory takings, and it can be defined as stealth expropriation without compensation. I think that's a good phrase to remember. I think that we could use the word unfair, and the other phrase is natural justice, which is something by which all society should live under the law.
My name is Colin Campbell. I live at 545 Woodley Road. I used to be a bureaucrat.
We
can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. I was head of planning for BC Parks, so I've been a bureaucrat, basically. I understand political systems a little bit. And so the following comments are, 1, congratulations on this group and what you've done. That's really, truly been excellent. But you're too nice. I think really, I think there need to be people helping you either end of the spectrum. That is, you need some mean and nasty people, and you also need some real visionaries, you know. And I say that only because the last gentleman's right, you know. We have to improve our protection of the environment, and we have to take responsibility for that, individually in Saanich. And I think we shouldn't miss the fact that Saanich may have taken what we call technically in the business a stupid approach and ended up really creating all kinds of trauma, and their staff may have actually helped the municipality to screw it up one way or the other. That is what's happened. And so the issue here, though, is firstly, we have to remember there are people who really want to protect the environment who are enacting some of this legislation right now. They're just doing it entirely the wrong way, you know. So I think what we have to do is recognize that we and they have something in common, you know. We all want to protect that environment. And the issue is we really don't have a vision as to how to do it. Because ecology is about systems. It's not about little pieces of rain, you know, raindrop, you know, snowdrops or whatever. It's about a flowing system of nature interacting through a municipal area. This is not easy stuff to manage. And the best of times, it's even worse when you get buildings cut on top of it in a random fashion, which is what we have. So my suggestion is, one, the Mayor Admiral, and I'm so pleased he's here, the Mayor Admiral doesn't ask for 6 months to sort this out. He puts a moratorium on it. In other words, this stops. A clean, in other words, take a clear, direct aim as number one. Stop it dead now. And number two, compliment them for Saanich being innovative enough to actually advance something that nobody else has dared to do. Because they do deserve to be complimented on that, even though it's the wrong approach. And thirdly, bring together an appropriate group of people to actually build a strategy that can be the envy of everybody in the province, making the Saanich look good, and the mayor and council look good. But that's not going to be done in 6 months. So I believe that these 3 steps, could actually really move us forward in a constructive, sort of positive fashion. And I really congratulate you on what you've done thus far. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chris Phillips, and my story could be called Catch-22. We were first shown a property at the end of Gordon Head Road, an acre and a half, in April 2012. Before buying the property, we went to Saanich, not once but 3 times, to discuss setbacks of the existing house, which we planned to take down, the possibility for subdivisions, and after we discovered while we were down there that it was on a septic system, whether or not we could go and sue. They told us once we closed on the property, because we had no notice of an EDPA, nobody mentioned anything on any of those scripts, even though it was brought into law in March of 2012. Once we put in the application to go in the sewage system, we were told we'd have to get a letter from VHA saying that they don't support an on-site system, which we did. They came up there and they said because of the EDPA, we could not go on the sewage system. So, and the rock situation where there's not enough percolation to occur. So we applied, and it took 1 year to be denied. They just told us they would not support the application, so we'd have to go back to VHA to do it. Now VHA were amazing. They worked with us, and we had to hire a sewage engineer to design it, but we got that done. But the EDPA continued to cause problems, twofold. One, it went through the middle of the existing house. And two, this buffer zone that was mentioned also came real close to my front setback line. Now, I mentioned Catch-22. Here's where that impacted us. The lot line behind us is an interior lot line for my neighbor, but was called a front lot line for me. So even though he could build 5 feet from that line, I had to stay nearly 50 feet from it. The 50-foot mark put me perilously close to the buffer zone. So I was denied to move the house anywhere else but the existing footprint. So for 65,000 square feet, I was allowed to use 3,500 square feet of my own land. That's what I was reduced to, right? And it just got porous from there. Then we were told in order to go for a variance, we had to get a covenant in place. And before we could go to planning, this covenant had to be filed and recorded. Otherwise, we would not have the opportunity to go to planning. So we were railroaded every inch of the way. And we put our faith in the system that this was a legal thing they were doing. We had no way of knowing it was illegal. To make matters worse, our land was rated as degraded, disturbed, or overgrown with invasive species. There was no form of anything on it that was worth saving. And we were still allowed to be, trapped in this EDPA. And they have taken from us more than half of our land with no compensation whatsoever. So if you weren't scared before, believe me, if you want to get anywhere, that's what happens. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Steve Sexsmith, I live in Arundel Drive. We're back on the Portage Inlet. We have actually gone through a development since the EDPA came in. We had to give up 15 meters as our buffer zone from the high tide mark. So the amount of addition I was able to do ended up being much smaller than what we'd originally planned. And it's not the council, it's not the mayor. Thank you, Richard, for coming. And thank you, everyone, for coming out. This has been a great turnout. But my personal experience is that it's the staff, and the staff are running the show.
My name is Kevin Starling. I'm a long-time Saanich resident, and I'm really here as a realtor today, representing a client of mine who lives on Burnside Road West. Her dad bought two neighboring acre properties side by side adjacent to Knockino Park about 50 years ago, a little more than that, and built a little log cabin on it. This environmental development area now is encompassed about 75% of one of the acres on, well, both of the acres on it, and she's interested in selling one of them. She never really wanted to develop it, but just to put it in perspective for you, I'm not trying to speak to the assessed values of the properties on them, but for 2014, the assessment on her property was $655,000 for the one single acre in it. I've had the property being marketed right now for $415,000 in excess of 6 months, and nobody has come to buy it. Wow. So a couple of $100,000, just so you know.
Is the assessment of that, because they were looking for statistics around EDPA properties that are selling and what's the
They're not selling.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they're not selling.
That's really helpful information.
My name is Liam. I live on 908 Arundel, which is Portage Inlet. My profession is actually building gardens. My specialty is native plantings and water catchment systems and rain gardens, so my focus is on this, so I really understand these issues. I think it's fair to explain my situation. I bought my house about 3 or 4 months before the EDPA was enacted, and I took my lot information to the city, and I asked them for all the information on the property, and they were very, very helpful and gave me a very appropriate information about the forthcoming changes that were to happen, and explained the entire process to me, the building and the planning department, before I bought it. And the decision I made was to still go ahead and buy it. And like the other gentleman here, 45 feet from high tide mark, I went into it knowing exactly what was in store for me, and I still bought it. My disappointment here is that there was one sentence in your slideshow explaining what the merits principally of the EDPA is. I think if you actually want to have education, you have to get in and actually say, what are they trying to do, and what are the principles behind it, not just a bit of a witch hunt going after Gary oaks and daffodils and lawns. There is actually a principle, and there is some importance to it, and I think it's fair, biologists and people educated and people that are researched in this, to actually explain this to the layperson and say, actually there is some good here Let's not just take out Sandwich staff and throw it out in moratoriums and they're taking our rights away. Try to explain what they're trying to do and bring that to it as well.
Yes, I think that's a really important point.
It's about solutions, not just throwing it out the window and getting angry.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe somebody from Saanich should be here tonight to answer these questions that only people from Saanich that are staff and not elected officials can answer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Last question?
Wally Marcinkovic, 4627 Van Trake Drive, so waterfront property. Elaborating on VHAP, the fellow spoke of a development property. What about existing properties? We all know that there's actually a lot of failing treatment systems that are waterfront, that are not hooked up to the sewer system. Even though that the sewers might be on the road, but they're at a higher level. And right now with the bylaws with Saanich, if you wanted to tap into the existing sewer system, you cannot pump up, so they'll just reject you. And that's basically what I had to go through. However, I was fortunate enough that I had a septic field that had a pipe that ran into the ocean. So I got a rubber stamp. I could pump up, and I have a connection to the property line. So what about all the other systems that are failing? So there's a VHOC cost here to the waterfront owners.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much for all that the input, the ideas. That was really helpful for us to help build our case. And anyone who wants to get nasty and wants to help in terms of volunteering for more council letters, etc. We'll get into that more, but we're really looking for you guys to help us in getting this message out there. So over to you, Anita. I think you're going to talk about next steps.
All right. We're going to take the feedback that you've given us tonight, and we'll post it on our website, www.edpa.ca. That will be on the sheets that we've left out on the tables out there. And then we're going to prepare a draft report to council on your recommendations and some of the ideas that we've had as well. Then the next step, request input on our draft report via our website. So go onto our website, look at the draft report, give us your input. We will continue to gather petition signatures, and then we're going to submit the petition and report to council. Our target is May 31st. So if you could encourage everyone you know in Saanich to sign that petition and get that in as quickly as possible, that would be helpful. I don't know. All right. And then we've left sheets out there again on the table, and it lists steps as to what you can do to help out. Number one, write a letter to council. We've given the email address. Email us. Visit our website. Contact senior staff at the Saanich staff. Andy Laidlaw is the COA. Sharon Habanovsky is Director of Planning. Adrian Pollard is Manager of Environmental Services. As we talked about earlier, write a letter to the newspaper, talk to your friends and neighbors, get them to sign the petition, like our Facebook, contact the Ombudsman of British Columbia, and join the Saanich Citizens for Responsible EDPA to help raise awareness. And again, if you could all ask 5 people to sign the petition, that would be great. Thank you.
Just wanted to say thanks for the members of the Saanich Citizens for Responsible EDPA. They have contributed your own time and money to put this on and to continue the fight. We are collecting donations outside if anyone is interested in helping out. We appreciate your support in that regard. And just finally, thank you for coming, and thanks for your time and all your support.